Before we start this episode of the podcast, I just want to share with you a program we've developed to help brewing industry businesses adversely affected by shutdowns for COVID-19. Our Craft Beer and Brewing Cares grant program will award $25,000 advertising credits to brewing-related businesses like breweries, manufacturers, ingredient suppliers, and more who've seen their businesses suffer over the past few weeks. Go to beerandbrewing.com/grant to learn more and fill out the quick application. Award recipients will be notified April 10th, 2020. No one thing is going to fix the wide-ranging negative impact of global shutdowns, but we hope this program can help some businesses through this difficult time. Now, on to this week's podcast, which, to reassure you, was recorded about a month ago before social distancing became the norm. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing magazine, Jamie Bogner. I'm here in Richmond, Virginia, sitting in a small, nondescript, speakeasy-style warehouse filled to the brim with wooden barrels full of traditional sour and wild beer, brewed by my guest on the podcast today, Matt Tarpey, co-founder and head brewer for The Veil. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
I really wanted to pronounce it Tarpey, but
I really wish you would have.
I'm going to stick with Tarpey on that one. We're going to talk to Matt about all sorts of brewing focuses for the brewery. If you're familiar with The Veil, you know that they specialize in everything from spontaneous and wild beers to cutting-edge hazy IPAs, imperial stouts, and barrel-aged barley wines filled with all manner of fun and silly and engaging ingredients. We're going to kind of cross the spectrum of brewing with Matt today and kind of get into the fun, get into the crazy, get into the serious and traditional and historical kind of approaches. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation about brewing with that, Matt.
I'm looking forward to it too.
Cool. Before we start the conversation, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. Thinking outside the box, whether it's a simple relocation of the utility connections for a complex buildup or ground-level design and engineering, G&D is ready to meet the challenge. They're big enough to produce and small enough to care. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, kickstart your innovation with Old Orchard Craft Juice Concentrates. Old Orchard knows that a strategic seasonal release calendar means higher margins, increased taproom traffic, and secured shelf space for your brand. That's why they collaborate with countless breweries on product development conversations year-round. With unique flavors like watermelon, rhubarb, pineapple, and plum, the possibilities are endless. Get your Old Orchard sample kit with a free 6-pack cooler at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. A reminder before we get started, Craft Beer and Brewing's All Access subscriptions give you a year of the print and digital editions of the magazine, plus access to our library of video courses, special deep dive email only for All Access subscribers, premium content, and All Access exclusive merchandise. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, join now, support our mission to bring you the insights from some of the best and most creative brewers around the world. Speaking of those creative insights from fantastic brewers, Matt, let's talk about brewing.
Let's do it.
So the way we normally kick things off here is with a little bit of discussion about your brewing history. Talk to me about how you got into brewing and what path you took to lead right here and co-founding The Veil.
Okay. So I got into brewing on accident. I never really wanted to get into brewing. I never homebrewed in my entire life. I started volunteering at a local regional brewery down in Norfolk, Virginia, called O'Connor Brewing Company back in their inaugural year in 2010. And I would volunteer from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. Then I'd go work my day job, 7 to 3:30 or 4. And then I'd go back to the brewery and work 4 to 7 p.m. And I did that 5 days a week for about 6 months. And then the owner felt bad for me and was like, hey, why don't you just come on board and we'll pay you what you're making down there so you don't have to come in so early. And so started working there full time in April 2011. So I started volunteering there just as a kind of something to do on the side. I was interested in learning a little bit more about brewing, but I thought it would just be kind of a fun volunteer opportunity, get some free beer out of it, and just do something different. I was actually trying to be a firefighter at the time, and I was just working my normal construction job for an awning company. And yeah, so I started working there, volunteering. I really fell in love with the industry, the process, and just being in a brewery, and everything involved with beer making. I was so intrigued with the process, asking a lot of questions, all that, and just fell in love with it, absolutely, just from the volunteer opportunity that I had. So in 2011, April 2011, I started full-time at O'Connor Brewing Company. I was just a shift brewer, and I would brew 4 or 5 days a week, and under the head brewer at the time, Jimmy Walsh. And I worked there for just about until the end of 2011. A friend of mine who was the former head brewer of O'Connor, his name Chris O'Connor, he had a friend and connection with Tod Mott, who worked at Portsmouth Brewery in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. A very famous New England brew pub, very well known for the Kate the Great.
Yeah.
I actually reached out to Chris to reach out to Tod Mott to see if I could just do like a 2-week internship with him, just so I can learn, ask questions, be around a different brewing environment in a place that brewed multiple styles. So he called and he said, "Yes, of course you can come and do an apprenticeship or internship with me." And then he told Chris, "But if your friend is looking for a job, funny you're calling me is because my assistant just put his notice in." So
it's good timing.
Yeah, so I had no resume, so I frantically went home.
Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Right?
Exactly. So I frantically went home and wrote a resume really quick and fired it off via email. Got a phone call back from Tod, and he was like, "Oh, you really want to drive from Virginia to Portsmouth, New Hampshire to do a working interview with me?" And I was like, "Oh, yes, of course, I'll do it." So I did that. I was one of 6 people to try out for the job. I was the only person that wasn't fresh out of brewing school. I was the only person who didn't homebrew too. It was just a great day of brewing and asking questions and getting our hands dirty, and we really kind of bonded that day. And so it was just kind of fun. And came back home. Tod kind of left me on hold there for a minute. I was like, "Is he ever going to call me back?" And so. Kind of funny story. I had been trying for years. I'm trying to make this quick so we can get into some fun stuff. But funny story is I was trying for years and years to be a firefighter, and it was very difficult to be a firefighter in Hampton Roads, Virginia. So I kind of gave up on the process once I started being a shift brewer at O'Connor because I fell in love with it. And then I got this opportunity to work with Tod Mott. So I went and did my working interview on hold, waiting for Tod to call me back and let me know either way. And I actually got a phone call from the Chesapeake Fire Department saying that, we didn't do testing this year, but we want to offer you a position in the academy. And I was shocked. I didn't see that coming. And they gave me 4 hours to make my decision. And everyone I talked to, family and friends, were like, "Go with your gut." And my gut was that I was going to try my hardest to make it work with Tod and hopefully follow up with him and do right by him. So on Christmas Eve day, Tod Mott gave me a call and offered me the position. He thought it was a nice gesture to offer me something on Christmas Eve, but I thought it was misery that I had to wait 3 weeks to hear back from him
and turn down an opportunity at the fire academy.
Exactly.
In the process.
Yeah. So, and ultimately, I was definitely grateful for that opportunity. So moved up to New Hampshire, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and started January 2012 with Tod Mott. Had an amazing time working at Portsmouth Brewery, learned so much. We brewed so many different styles of beer, different types of yeast. I mean, at the previous brewery I was working at, one type of ale yeast, that's it. Right. So got to experiment with all these different types of Belgian yeast, all that stuff. We had very simplistic grain bills at the former brewery. So just learning a lot about different malts and all that stuff was super intriguing to me and exciting. So one day, I was sitting with Tod in the Jimmy Palooza Lounge, which is like the basement bar at Portsmouth Brewery, and Tod Mott sat me down and tears in his eyes, and he said, "Matt, I know you just moved up to New Hampshire to come work for me, but I'm leaving Portsmouth Brewery. I'm going to go start my own brewery. And he is really emotional for both of us because I just moved my whole life up here for this opportunity. So then I, as determined as I am, it's like, okay, so what's next for me? I can't stay here. I moved to work with Tod, and he's not going to be open for a while. So maybe I'll be able to work with him later, but what's next?
Sure.
So I just asked around, and I actually tried to get a job at Allagash, and that didn't work. And then I had met John Kimmick from The Alchemist while I was at working at Portsmouth Brewery, because we did a collaboration for the Vermont Brewers Festival that Portsmouth Brewery always participated in annually.
Yeah.
So I asked John if I had heard through the grapevine he was hiring, or some guy that he was going to have be his third shift brewer ended up leaving or something. So I reached out to him and I was like, hey, are you going to be hiring? And he was like, matter of fact, I am. Would you like to come and interview? So I went and interviewed with him, and and that was in the fall, early, just about the end of fall, early winter of 2012.
Yeah.
And I went and interviewed with him at Waterbury, and he showed me all around the brewery and all that stuff. And I was really anxious and hopeful, but I didn't know how I was going to go. So at the end, he brought me into the office and asked me a bunch of questions, and I was starting to, trying to give him my spiel about why you should hire me.
Right.
And I said to him, so if you guys do decide to hire me, I started my conversation with that. And then he butted in and he was like, whoa, we're going to hire you. I mean, that's why I called you to come here. This whole time I thought I was on an interview, but it was like, it was just kind of a walk.
This is your introduction.
Yeah, apparently.
You're hired.
Yeah. So that was a friendly, or a pleasant surprise, I suppose.
Sure.
So decided to move to Vermont. Moved in December, started basically on my birthday of 2012, working at Alchemist as the third shift brewer.
Yeah.
Backtrack a little bit, back to the summer. The first festival, Shelton Brothers, the festival, happened in Massachusetts, where they brought all the European brewers over from, brewers from all over the world, were there to pour their beer. That's where I met Jean Benoit, the master brewer of Cantillon. So I met him while I was there. I asked him, I said, if I were to come over to Belgium, would you let me work with you and just learn from you, ask questions, and hang out with you? And he kind of looked at me shocked, and he said to me, if you come to Belgium, you can come work with me. And I was blown away, So I was like, okay, yeah, that's amazing. And then he was like, yeah, but I can't pay you. And I was like, oh, no need. I don't need money. I just want to come over there and ask questions and be able to learn, And because I was super intrigued with lambic at the time, as we all were, I guess, or still are. I still am.
Sure.
And he said to me, yeah, but we can open special bottles and, all that stuff. And I was like, oh, great. Yeah, that's perfect. That'd be perfect. So I asked him, oh, can I get your contact, And he was like, yeah, write this down. And I was just like, oh, great. He just gave me like the most generic email ever. He's probably going to get 7 million emails from all the people he met this weekend. He's never going to write me back. So I waited a week. I played it cool, like a first date. You don't want to just message them the same day, you know. So I wrote him an email.
7 days, man. You're playing the game hard.
Yeah. So I wrote him an email, and he actually wrote me back almost immediately and said, I've met hundreds of people this weekend, but I remember you, and please come and be my guest. So actually, my wife and I, we went and so we planned it. We were poor. We had no money. we were assistant brewer at a brew pub, and we'd moved our life up from Virginia to New Hampshire, and
now she's like, oh yeah, we're gonna go spend some time in Europe now. Sure, Matt.
She was excited actually,
Okay.
So, but we just asked when we had our wedding. We decided to back in 2012. We had our we decided to just elope so we could save some money. we said we don't want any gifts, just anybody just give us money because we're trying to do a trip or something.
Right.
You know, even if it's $5, I'd rather have $5 than 2 toasters. You know what I mean?
And so you took your honeymoon money and you went and worked at Cantillon in Belgium with that?
On our honeymoon.
On
Yeah.
your honeymoon.
Yeah. So I spent my honeymoon working at Cantillon for 2 weeks.
Oh, man. That's true love right there.
Yeah. So
She's a keeper.
John never lets that down. So, and his mom gave us chocolates and all this stuff. It was actually pretty sweet. But anyway, so
Yeah.
I ended up doing a internship. My first internship I've done 3 so far. I did a 2-week internship in January, of 2013 while I was working at The Alchemist.
Yeah.
Upon my return, that's when I started brewing. So I was brewing at The Alchemist, amazing place to work, great
Sure.
people, incredible beer. At that time, that was right around the time that on Beer Advocate, it was rated the #1 beer in the world.
Right.
So it was as hyped as it could ever be. And I loved the beer and I loved the process.
Sure.
And again, I kind of felt they took great care of their employees. They made it so you didn't have to work 60 hours a week.
Right,
Right. So I was working 4 days a week, and then every third week I'd work a Friday for a few hours. So I was kind of feeling at that time I was spinning my wheels, only making one beer over and over and over. It's incredible beer, but just making one beer over and over.
Sure,
Wasn't learning
sure.
again. So I actually met Shaun Hill at the Oxbow Welcome to Vermont event at Three Penny Tap Room. And he was like, "Oh yeah, no, I've heard about you. I know Tod, and you work at. I heard you went to Cantillon, all that stuff." So we met. He was like, "Oh, come by the brewery. I'll show you around." And so I went over there, got some beer, and hung out one time. And then I just asked him. I kept in touch with him and asked. I was like, "Hey, I don't really do anything on Fridays. Would it be cool if I came around and just like hung out? I'll squeegee the floors. I'll just bottle beer, do whatever you need." And kind of back to square one, right? Where I'm just like volunteering and trying to learn and just ask questions and just be involved with the process and see something different, right? Never done anything with barrels at that point in my life. I had never done anything really with wild beer other than just the apprenticeship with Cantillon. So he let me do that. I did that for a while, like a couple months. And then Dan Suarez, his assistant at the time, left to start his own brewery.
Sure.
Suarez Family Brewery, incredible brewery from New York. So he left to start his own brewery. And then Shaun was like, "Hey, do you want to be my assistant?" And so I was like, "Yes, of course. I'd love to. I'd love to learn more and be involved with barrel-aged beer and all that stuff."
That's an offer you can't refuse.
Yeah. So that's how I started working at
Sure.
Hill Farmstead, and that was in the summer of 2013. A year and some change went by, and almost over a year and a half went by, and I was kind of just going through the motions and having a great time, learning a lot, working
Sure.
with Shaun, making some incredible. I wasn't making the beer. Shaun was the brewer, and I did everything else. So he did all the work production, and of course he did other things in the brewery too. You'd see him do everything. He'd be bottling beer, he'd be filling barrels. But I kind of did, like, I was his true assistant. So I would CIP tanks, pitch yeast, dry hop, do all that stuff. I'd extract beer from barrels, fill barrels, do all the stuff, bottle beer, and so we were just kind of going through the motions. Unfortunately, my wife's father was ill and was not doing too well, so she had to move back down to Virginia to help take care of her.
Right.
And by chance, right around that time, I had met this guy from Virginia who was a friend of a friend, all by chance. And he, we hit it off. He was a cool guy, beer guy, and beer trader, all that stuff. And one day we were chatting, and he was like, "I'd like to send you some beers from Virginia, to let you know what Virginia's got going on right now." And he's from Richmond. And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Send me some beer." So he sent me some beer. And then a week later, he's like, "Oh, did you try the beer?" I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "What'd you think?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, it was fine. It wasn't bad. It was not bad." And so he said to me, he's like, "Yeah, well, somebody should come to Virginia and make some cool beer." And then I was like, yeah, that'd be cool. He was like, you should do it. And I laughed at him. I was like, no way. I don't want that. I don't want to be a brewer. I don't want to own my own brewery or be a part of that at all. I don't want to be a part of startup. I've seen startups. I've seen the stresses, the hair pulls, oh crap, it's 11 o'clock at night and your chiller goes down or something like that, or whatever. Just the stresses of money and taxes and all this stuff. I didn't want anything to do with that. So I was just laughed at him about it. And then as things kind of happened, progressed with in terms of my family and all that stuff, just kind of discussing it with my wife and just being like, oh, what are we going to do? And she was like, well, we got to move back home. What are we going to do? You know? And I was like, I have this opportunity. I don't know if I should try it, you know? And she was like, well, just talk to the guy and see what he says, you know? So I reached back out to him. I was like, hey, were you serious? And this guy's name's Dustin Durrance, one of my business partners currently. I
figured that was how this was going to resolve.
Yeah. So he reached out or I reached out to him and I was like, are you serious? And he was like, yeah, sure. Give me a week or two. I'm going to call some people and we'll get back to you and see where we're at. A couple of weeks later, he was like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah, I called you to see if you were serious, you know? And he was like, all right, cool. Well, I have the team. We're fully funded. Let me know when you're ready to move down. And I was like,
that was quick.
I was like, all right, we need to talk more. Like, this is kind of crazy.
Sure.
Yeah. So we spent a few months kind of going back and forth on what we wanted to do, business plan, all that stuff. Right. They fortunately, so Dustin Durrance got my other main business partner, Dave Michaelo, involved. And we were kind of the core managers of the initial startup of the Veil. And we spent a lot of time just chatting about what we want to do. And they were very, I'm very grateful for this. They were very kind to me about being able to have freedom. What do you want to do? Right. What do you think is cool? Right. You know, what kind of beers do you want to make? So they gave me free run to do anything I wanted. Any of the beer names, what size brewery do you want? How do you want to do it? Do you want a tap room? Do you not want a tap room? So I'm very fortunate for that, first and foremost. So we kind of came up with a game plan, came up with the name of the Veil, which is rooted from my first apprenticeship at Cantillon, which I can talk about later if we want the name, history of the name. And so that was it. So in May of 2015, I left Hill Farmstead and moved to Richmond, Virginia to start the Veil. First brew of the Veil was in March of 2016. And now we're here.
Let's talk a little bit about the beers that you brew. But before we do that, the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, Fermentis is the obvious choice for beverage fermentation. They've provided the beer industry, from large and small breweries to home brewers, with the best fermentation yeasts since 2003. Their yeasts are easy to use. Just pitch your Fermentis yeast directly into your wort. No rehydration necessary. To learn more about how Fermentis can improve the quality of your fermentation and for the latest on their exciting new product releases, visit fermentis.com or visit them at the Craft Brewers Conference in San Antonio, booth 8071. So Matt, here we are, and we're in your sour beer only facility, but earlier we were walking through the main brewery and tap room with a little cool ship room at the top where you made that first spontaneous beer.
Right.
Here you are in the middle of the South in a place that's really hot for a good part of the year, making some sour and funky beer with hundreds and hundreds of barrels of this stuff around us. But it's also, that respect for tradition is also balanced against a pretty progressive approach to things like fruited, lactose-heavy IPAs, pastry stouts. You had just tanked something with Oreos into a tote that you were conditioning on, and so at times balance both this kind of progressive, fun, let's try it and let's, be creative approach with this very traditionally minded, we're going to do this in the most traditional way possible. Talk to me a little bit about that kind of yin and yang of your brewing philosophy.
Yeah, so yin and yang, that's a good way to put it, I guess. But yeah, I mean, life's too short to just be serious and like so focused. And I mean, we're focused on everything we do, even the Oreo beers, right? We're focused on that, and it's super intense for us, and we're constantly tasting them and trying new ways of incorporating the character and different ratios and all that stuff.
Wait, you mean it's not just lazy brewing where you throw a bunch of crap in there and it just magically turns out into something?
Oh yes, yeah, it's definitely not that for sure. So we're focused on everything that we do, but the way that our business is designed, and it's the same way that we we focus on the way that we brew. So it's balancing the serious and the fun, right? So you want to do the beers that you're super focused on and super intrigued by, and the beers that you want to drink are a little bit more delicate, that you can have 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, right? Like a lager or a mixed fermentation beer, delicate table beer or something like that. You want to balance that with something that's crazy and wacky and fun, right? So a lot of people, they go to work and they do their work and they're focused and they get their job done. And then on the weekends and at night, they like to cut loose a little bit, right? They want to go play golf or to go on a vacation, or, or they have a crazy hobby like, drag racing or something like that. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the approach that we have with brewing, right? So we grind, we're super focused and, very technique oriented, and we love these delicate beers, but we also love the wild, crazy beers. And it's super interesting and fun for us to do a triple fruited goza or double Oreo chocolate milk stout or something like that, so
because it forces you to look at things in a different way and forces you to solve a problem that you don't solve otherwise.
For sure. Yeah. And it's just learning. Right. So, I mean,
that seems to be a common theme through your brewing history and experience, that throwing yourself into uncomfortable positions or even volunteering at times just to keep the challenge coming.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you can learn by adjunct additions. Oh, you can learn by, brewing a style you've never brewed before, but it's all learning. Right. So, could you tell me right now, if I have a 30 barrel batch of beer, what's the pounds per barrel ratio that you would suggest for Oreos?
Let me check the label and the spec sheet from the ingredient provider
right.
to look at the the extraction ratio for these Oreo cookies.
Exactly. Yeah. So you don't know.
Sure.
So unless you try it, unless you learn, you know what I mean? So I'm not like the godfather of adjuncts or anything like that, but I've definitely have had friends that have reached out to me and been like, hey, what would you do for Oreos? How much Oreos are you putting in per barrel? Stuff like that, And of course, I'm doing the same with my colleagues too.
Sure.
An adjunct I've never tried before. What's your cinnamon rate? That kind of stuff. So we're talking about that kind of stuff all the time.
What's the strangest thing that you've learned from one of those adjunct ingredients? One of the things that threw you for a loop and caused you to really knuckle down and figure it out. And then what did you discover that was maybe counterintuitive about it?
That's a hard question to answer there. Not so much in terms of like issues that I had, but something that was just strange that happened. So we put a ton of Nutella in a beer one time. Like we had like 5-gallon buckets of Nutella. We're like scraping Nutella in there, and just getting really weird with it, and which I love. I love that kind of stuff. And then when we were cleaning the tank, it like coagulated into this like weird like wax that coated the whole bottom of the tank, and it took us like almost a whole day to get all the stuff out of the tank. So I don't know. That was one weird adjunct thing that we learned. But yeah,
do you simulate Nutella by using hazelnuts and whatnot in a different way now instead of using actual Nutella.
We're kind of scarred by Nutella
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Nutella characteristics now.
It's just done. I'm
Yeah,
not touching it
we will
anymore.
do hazelnut, straight up
Yeah,
hazelnut,
yeah.
and we say hazelnut. And we don't say Nutella anymore.
Yeah.
We're kind of scarred by hazelnut, but I mean Nutella. But
If you put that on the schedule board, your brewers look at that and say, oh, no.
Oh yeah, there's definitely like some weird stuff that happens if you even just say Nutella in the back of
Okay.
the brewery
Yeah.
nowadays. But yeah, so I don't know. We've tried like a lot of different things, a bunch of different. We've tried marshmallows in every way. Marshmallows on the hot side, marshmallows on the cold side. And in fermentation, knock out on marshmallows on the bright tank, marshmallow extract. We've tried. I sound like freaking Forrest Gump right now, but that's what we've done. We've tried. We've experimented.
What
with
do you
all these
like the
things.
best?
I'm partial to straight up vanilla. I love vanilla.
Yeah.
We use vanilla beans, whole vanilla beans, and we just take the beans and just put them into a giant Vitamix and grind them all up and just throw them in there. But we will get.
Are there
pounds
specific
and
vanilla
pounds.
types that you really like, or origins of vanilla?
Yeah, I mean, I like Tahitian. I like Ugandan a lot too. Ugandan's really cool. It kind of has like almost like a tobacco leathery character to it, which I really dig. Madagascar is king still in my opinion.
Sure.
He gets you that really like marshmallow fluff kind of vibe, and it's. But I'm definitely partial to vanilla for sure. I love coconut. I love coconut beers, like the taste and the smell of coconut.
Yeah.
But it's so frustrating to work with real coconut because
Yeah.
to me, to get real coconut character, you just have to use a ton of it.
Right.
And it is just brutal. Like there goes your volume, number one.
That's right.
Number two,
It's going to absorb all your liquids. So, yeah.
Number two, it's just a pain to get out of the tank.
Right.
Number three, there's so much coconut oil on the ground. Everyone's slipping around, even with boots, But I do love coconut. I just love the smell and the taste. So I'd say coconut and vanilla.
Do you toast it before you add it?
Tried every way.
Yeah.
I've tried toasted. I've tried untoasted. I've tried every single way. Hot side, cold side. Which way you want to know? So I think.
Are there some methods that you kind of settled in on, and stuff that you like?
I think for us, we do untoasted.
Okay.
We just throw a ton of it in there.
Sure.
We do untoasted. For me, one of
small grind, big grind,
like
or
macaroon,
grate.
kind of like shreds.
Yeah.
We have done the coconut flour. We've done coconut, all this stuff. But I'd say macaroon like shreds is the untoasted is our preference. The best, in my opinion, one of the best coconut beers we've ever released was actually a 60-40 blend of untoasted and toasted.
Interesting.
But it was the worst, catastrophic volume loss ever, and we all cried a tear because it was like this super special beer was just like really special to us. It was like 3 or 4 years in the making. It was a double barrel beer that we had made that me and Hennek from Omnipollo dreamt about in his pizza shop in 2016, and then it finally came to fruition, and we lost it was catastrophic. It was like 60% loss or something to the coconut because we just went so heavy on it. But it was worth it. It was one of in my opinion, it was the best coconut beer ever out of the Vale. So the blend of the untoasted and toasted might be the way to go, but I think an overall character of aroma, flavor, and adequate volume. For us, it's untoasted.
Do you find that different alcohol ABV levels of these beers as you push them on, because you are also conditioning, beers, smaller beers and smaller, quicker sour beers on fruit in addition to conditioning big beers on those? Do you find that alcohol ABV level impacts your extraction in any way?
That's funny you say that. We were literally just having this conversation today. So we just put a bourbon barrel aged imperial stout on 1,200 pounds of Oreo cookies, the tote that I had showed you.
Yeah.
And that beer that we packaged today or transferred over to Bright Tank off of the Oreos is the most Oreo forward beer we've ever made. It was the first time we had ever put Oreos in an imperial stout. We had used it in our base chocolate milk stout called Hornswoggle that comes in around 7% ABV.
Yeah.
We use that very frequently in that beer. But it was the first time we had used the Oreos in an imperial version of any type of stout.
Right.
So 10% ABV or plus. So this one was probably about 13 or 14% post barrel aging. So it is this insane the Oreo character to me that we're getting in this, and I think it truly is because of the ABV of the base beer. I think that it's essentially like a tincture, right? So like you're just getting more extraction because of the higher ABV. But I definitely agree with that. I think the higher the ABV, the more extraction you get out of that, out of these adjuncts.
Interesting. And I mean, there's obviously no rules as to how long or what, because these are all conditional and you just have to taste them as you're going, come across it. But that is kind of, we have been kind of trying to think about that and how that might impact even the volumes that you need to, because I mean, you're talking about adding expensive ingredients to these beers too. Yeah. Packaged goods and processed foods like Oreos are not exactly cheap ingredients to throw in bulk in there. And so if you could use a little bit less of them and take a benefit of that in a big high ABV beer, then it's probably going to be more efficient. You'll lose less beer that way and everything else. Yeah. Are there any, while you are pushing things into the tank, do you use any tricks to kind of improve extraction from some of these ingredients?
Not necessarily. We're pretty straightforward when it comes to, racking on top of adjuncts. So, for instance, if we're doing like a Hornswoggle, like we're going to do an adjunct version of Hornswoggle, we do it in the fermenter in secondary fermentation. So we'll dump off all the yeast, add the adjuncts to the base beer in the fermenter, and just kind of rouse up with CO2 for like every day for a few days, 4 or 5 days, something like that. When it comes to racking onto a tank that already has adjuncts, say it's a barrel aged beer, and we put a ton of vanilla beans and cocoa nibs in a tank, sanitize the tank, throw the adjuncts in, purge the tank, then rack on top of that. And then we kind of do the same thing. We'll just kind of rouse up with CO2. Yeah. We don't really do the recirculation with or a spin mott or whatever some folks do. We have done it before. It does kind of work, but it's kind of just the way that we do things. It's just kind of the way that we do things. What's comfortable for us, what's fits our schedule, our busy schedule, because we're constantly trying to do like 20 things at once.
Yeah.
So our method may not be the most efficient method or the correct method. I don't think there's a correct method. I think whatever works for you works for you. And that's what really works for us, is just kind of adding it in secondary, or if it's post barrel aging or something, just adding it to a tank and racking it onto it.
It's cutting edge science and how to add Oreos into beers. Yeah. So, no, I love
That's what we're here to do, is just release the Oreo secrets.
All the Oreo secrets that everyone was always wondering about. Are there other crazy ingredients that have just been out of left field that you've really had fun with and found interesting ways of adding those?
Yeah, so
I'm going to pour a little more beer while you give me an answer to that.
Please do, yeah. So I'll pour you some, actually. So we recently did a beer that had activated charcoal in it.
Oh, yeah?
So it was a kettle soured beer with lactose and lemonade. So we were trying to do like a charcoal lemonade kind of vibe. So that was really interesting just to see that, and just the mind trick that kind of beverage in general, provides. Like when you have a standard non-alcoholic version at like your local juice shop or something like that, and you have a charcoal lemonade, it's just like crazy. It tastes like lemonade, but it's black. It's really just weird looking.
How do you keep it in suspension?
It just did.
Just does.
Okay.
Yeah,
we kind of did the same thing. We treated it as if it was like an adjunct. So we just added it when we added all the fruit, the lemon puree and lemon juice, and then we just kind of roused it for a few days, allowed it to re-ferment, and then it just stayed black. It was crazy. It just kind of stayed in suspension. Don't know. So I'm not a scientist. I consider myself an artist. I'm not a scientist. So I don't know. So, but it stayed in suspension for sure. So that was fun. I was really, really working on this one type of beer that this is kind of proprietary, but not really proprietary. And I I was trying to make a glow in the dark beer. I was trying to make this black light reactive beer, UV reactive beer. And I did all this research on what I could do to make this beer glow in the dark. And I found a company that sells edible glow in the dark stuff, basically.
Sure,
I'll just leave it at that. So I found this
FDA
company.
approved.
They claimed it was, but it was kind of weird. So I did all these really. I did
order
all
it
these
from some factory in Eastern Europe. Right?
It was super strange,
Yeah.
and then like the communication was weird, and like I got some samples, and we were bench testing it, and it was awesome, and I was loving it, and I was so excited about this glow in the dark beer.
Yeah.
And then I just was reading more about it, and then I kept bugging the guy who I was in contact with there. And I was like, can you give me like a spec sheet on this or something? And I just want to know what the ingredients are, And he was giving me the whole proprietary thing. And I was like, well, I just really need to know if we can consume this in large quantities, And he was like, oh, well, I got to talk to the lab. And it just got really weird and like sketchy, and it kind of fell off. But I mean, maybe he'll get back to me one day. I'm waiting for my dude to get back to me and let me know that it's safe to drink. If it is, then UV beer is coming your way, because it was sick when we were bench testing it. We had so much fun.
Put some new
with
black lights into the tap room just to make the beer come alive.
Oh my gosh, I'll have to send you pictures because it's mind blowing.
All right,
Glow in the dark beer. That's like what pains me. That's what I'm trying to do in life. Glow in the dark beer.
Parents must be so proud,
right?
Yeah. Which is so interesting because when you look at the Veil as a whole, it really is that study in contrasts. It's a cool, artful space. It looks like a Prada clothing store from Madison Avenue in New York. Actually, probably not even that. Probably Chelsea or further south.
That's a huge compliment, because that's what we were shooting for.
It looks, from the weird taxidermy animals to this kind of polished concrete. I mean, it's stunning. It's gorgeous,
Thank you.
And it's weird, and it's also compelling because it's weird. And then you taste these beers that are made with Oreos, but then you also have this other, highly traditional side of what you do. Let's talk a little bit about that. You mentioned that first beer is a spontaneous beer, and you brewed a whole bunch of spontaneous beers, right off the bat as you started the brewery, right before the weather started getting too warm to make those beers. Obviously, you paid your, you did an internship with Cantillon, and that kind of lambic and goose tradition is influential on you, and you wanted to, create a beer here that is like that is not that, but it is like that and inspired by that. Talk to me a little bit about how you went about doing that and what kind of changes you might have had to make to that to make it work within the environment that you're in here in Richmond.
So yeah, in terms of changes, there were no real changes that were done. So it's interesting, a lot of people have this romantic vision of spontaneous fermentation being in some orchard or cherry, farm tree, surrounded by cherry trees or something like that. And we had this question a lot before we opened, don't you need to be around some apple orchard or in like some winery or something and be in nature to capture this microflora that's going to be adequate to ferment your beer? And the funny thing is that if you've ever been to Cantillon, it's not in an orchard. It's like in a very heavily urban area,
sure.
With buses driving right by and planes flying very low over the space. It's very urban,
Sure.
And they're making some of the finest lambic in the entire world.
Yeah.
And some of my favorite personal lambics, and not because I'm biased, but so it's it's not, I don't think it's necessary to be in this very, nature forward, natural trees everywhere, place to capture microflora, right? So if Cantillon, my thought was if Cantillon can do this in an urban setting, so can we.
Sure.
So there wasn't much change that was needed or done in terms of how we produce our spontaneously fermented lambic-inspired beer. So But yeah, so I fell in love with lambic late. So when I first started getting into brewing, I started getting into beer trading too. I was definitely a beer trader, and I was really excited trying to get bottles of Dark Lord and Pliny the Elder and all this stuff. And then I did a trade with somebody who gave me some Pliny the Elder, and which I love that beer, still love that beer, and gave me a bottle of like one of their sour beers. I never had a sour beer in my life. And I just was thrown off by it. I was like, "What is this? I'm not into this." You know what I mean? Just being honest at the time, because my palate wasn't, it hadn't evolved. I didn't know this to be beer.
I think all of us who love those kinds of beers now have that same experience. That first, like, no, that's not my thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
it's a learned appreciation.
Exactly. And I think the first true wild, funky, sour beer that I had that I really enjoyed was Fafoon by Cantillon. So the apricot lambic.
Right.
And that opened my eyes to what sour beer could be, and wild beer, and acid and beer. So I went back to that beer from Russian River and loved it. And it was probably a year or so after the first time I had it.
Right.
Anyway, so I learned about lambic kind of late, and I just fell in love with it. Head over heels. And I always preferred lambic over traditional wild beers or mixed fermentation beers. I just preferred the extra funk and, just kind of like that musty cellar character to them.
Sure.
That was always just my personal palate preference, So I just fell in love with lambic. So when I started brewing and getting into the brewing industry, it was the most intriguing thing to me, because there was no breweries in my area that was making that type of beer, and I couldn't even ask anybody about it. No one could tell me about it. Only thing I could learn about was online. And even that stuff was just piecemealed together of people randomly asking questions, or knowing people who knew somebody who used to work at Cantillon. All these things. So
a lot of mystery and a lot of misdirection and not a lot of facts.
Exactly. And it was
a lot of romantic notions. Yeah.
Right. And it was super intriguing to me. That was the style that I had no access to. I couldn't learn about that.
Yeah.
And when I first met Shaun in summer of 2012, at that time in the States, there was only a handful of breweries that had a cool ship and that were doing spontaneous fermentation. It was Allagash, it was Vinny, Russian River, and a handful of others, but nobody really was like, Allagash probably was the ones that were the trailblazers of trying to do a traditional style lambic beer, inspired, I guess, because not technically lambic in Maine, but in the States,
right.
So with the turbid mash and the aged leaf and all that stuff. So it was very intriguing to me, and I wanted to learn more about that style. So, going over to Belgium and learning the true way to make lambic, that was what I wanted to do at some point in time. I wanted to brew that beer. And when I was there, I had no idea I was going to start a brewery. Never even wanted to start a brewery. I just wanted to be able to learn more about it and make those kind of beers somewhere, anywhere that would let me. I wanted to do that. That was my goal at that time, was to brew turbid mash spontaneous lambic inspired beer. That was my goal. So so when I went over there, I was just a sponge. I was soaking up as much information as possible. I walked around with a little notebook. Shaun encouraged me to ask as many questions as possible and write as many notes as possible. So I did just that, and I asked every single tiny question that I could about everything. Why does that look that way? Why do you stack the barrels this way? Every tiny little question. What would happen if you did 20% unmalted wheat and 80% Pilsner malt? All these questions. I learned as much as I possibly could, and Shaun was very supportive and encouraged me to, again, take notes and bring the knowledge he had given to me, because he himself says, there's no secrets. I have no secrets. There's no secrets in lambic. I will tell you whatever you ask. At least he said that to me. I took all of that information in like a sponge, and he's an incredible mentor, and he kind of paved the way for me and taught me a lot. And we don't have the same system. He has a very intricate system where he has two kettles, and they're on the second floor, and the mash tun's on the first floor, and he has like this belt-driven pump and everything. So it's a very old school brewing system. So our system is definitely modified and current and modern. Our process is similar to his process, but it's modified for our equipment. But it is as traditional as it can be, and it is close to the Cantillon turbid mash schedule as possible, just slightly altered for our modern equipment. So I guess that's the only change that we really made, is that we had to alter the traditional turbid mash schedule to fit our modern equipment.
Sure.
But other than that, there was no change.
Talk to me about ingredients. Where you find that the malt that you are sourcing for this impacts the flavor of yours, or are you buying from the same maltsters that they are there? Talk to me about your aged hops program a little bit, because clearly there are going to be some sort of differences in the way that these ingredients express themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So we just kind of buy malt from our standard malt supplier.
Yeah.
So we actually use Weirmann Pilsner malt.
Uh-huh.
So our grist bill for the spontaneous fermented lambic inspired beer is pretty simplistic. 60-40, 60% Weirmann Pilsner, 40% raw unmalted wheat. So right there, that is not the same malt that they
Sure.
use. They use a Belgian-sourced organic malt that I know of, and I'm pretty certain they still use that. But when I was there, that's what they used. So there's difference in terms of malt. So we are getting German malt, and we're getting unmalted wheat from the Midwest. I would like, and I'm hoping this year, that we're going to be able to move to Virginia grown unmalted wheat. I don't know if we'll ever get to the Pilsner thing,
Right.
but
Sure.
I would like to at least have Virginia grown unmalted wheat in our beer. So that is what my goal is for
Just for the
next
romantic
season.
story and attachment to the terroir.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And just supporting local economy too, you know what I mean, and other producers. But so there's that in terms of the malt profile. In terms of hops, we have what we call a house blend. So what I did was actually back in 2015, when we were starting our conversations with hop suppliers, we were I was asking them, we're estimating we're going to use this much Citra, this much Mosaic. We're going to make all these IPAs and all this stuff, right? And I was like, oh yeah, and by the way, do you have any old boxes of hops, leaf hop? And they're like, what? And I'd be like, yeah, I'll take whatever you got. And as old as 2009, and as young as 2013 or 14. At the time, I was only 1 or 2 years old.
Yeah.
And I was like, they can come in Mylar bags. I'll process them myself. And they were like, okay. So I bought a bunch of boxes, and then actually got a local brewery to loan me. This was while we're in the planning phases and build out of our brewery. Got a local brewery to loan me some grain bags. So I would cut all the Mylar bags, dump them into the grain bags, and then just duct tape them back up. And then I'd stick them in my friend's attic and where it was really hot and dry. And we put a dehumidifier up there too to make them even more dry. And we would just kind of let them age there, right? So that's what we did for the first few years when we didn't have an actual location for them. And then when we acquired the Funkhaus facility, our wild barrel storage facility, this is where we stored them. So at that, a few years into, or a year or so into brewing, actually right before, now that I'm thinking about it, I forgot about this. Right before we started brewing, I met Trevor from DeGard when I actually went out to Oregon to meet with Willamette Valley Hops, just start a relationship. I met Trevor. He just let me come by. I just shot him an email, and he was like, yeah, come on by. So he was a gracious host, let me come through and bug him on a day when he was busy, and I was just some guy that was about to start a brewery, another guy.
One of those guys.
Yeah, one of those guys. And, he was nice enough to let me come in. And then he had all these bales of hops laying around, and I was like, man, you got so much hops. He was like, yeah, I just bought a bunch of old bales, and I just aged them. And I was like, hey, well, if you're ever gonna let me go, he's like, oh, just email me, I'll send you some. So actually, our first a good portion of a good amount of volume that we received from our aged hops were from Trevor. So we actually got some 2011 bales from Trevor in beginning of 2016. And then we just allowed that old other stuff that I purchased from the hop supplier originally to just kind of age in the grain bags. So later on too, we bought some old, fresher bales. They were still about 2 years old, but we just bought as many bales as possible to kind of age and dry ourselves. So we did a blend. We have this house blend. So the house blend is a blend of aged leaf hops. We only use leaf hops. We don't use pellets. And the youngest we have currently is probably 2006 or 2017 crop year, and the oldest that's a part of the blend is 2009. So between 11 and 3 or 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old to 11 years old is what's inside the blend, and then it's all German varietals, or European varietals. So it's Tettnang, Hallertau Mittelfrüh, Czech Saaz, Target. And 2 or 3 others. So we have these big giant totes that we just pour them all in. We break up all the bales, pull out majority of the stems, and we just break them all up, and then we just kind of aerate them every month or so. We just kind of take like a hoe and just kind of pick them up and get the green stuff on top, and just allow them to dry out, oxidize, and then it's just all homogenized into this house blend. So instead of being like, okay, hey, let me get 10 pounds of 2012 Target, and then the next batch you do is 10 pounds of 2014 Hallertau Mittelfrüh, so you get these 2 different profiles, but instead we decided that we would just blend them all together to get one cohesive hop character.
I like that approach, and I love it. It's almost like a Solera method for your hops,
yeah,
where
for sure.
A little bit comes out, a little more goes in, and it all gets kind of spun into one thing. But in terms of, you're right, building a house flavor and a profile for the beer that you make, and creating a character that people can identify with what you do, that definitely would keep it more consistent. And, even though you're brewing different kinds of beers that ultimately express with different kinds of ingredients in them, kind of creates a common thread and, one piece that is relatively consistent and aligned through those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the next process. So you go through this brewing process, you brew your turbid mash, you pipe it up to the cool ship that you've built in a little room on the roof of the brewery. And for a startup brewery, I mean, you went through a very extensive build out to reinforce a ceiling, to pour a concrete floor that can sustain and hold the weight of all of this liquid that's up on the roof of this building that was not built for that kind of weight. You built a pump system to pump everything up there onto the top, and a louver system with screened-in windows in this whole custom-built little room, just in order to make some spontaneous beer. And a bunch of beer that you then wouldn't sell for a few years. Number one, how do you convince your business partners that this is a good idea? And, number two, that's crazy.
And number 2, that's crazy. You're not wrong.
I mean,
You're not wrong.
From any business perspective, that's insane. Come on.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. So first off, so again, I'm very fortunate that my business partners were kind of letting me have the free reins on this and allowing me to be creative and make the beers that I was passionate about, because they were also in turn passionate about the beers that I was too. So we were all on the same page. But when it came down to it, that was kind of the core of what the Veil is, right? So the name of the Veil came from my time when I was at Cantillon. It was one morning I was walking around the barrel storage facility, or just where the barrels were, where Shaun and I were just kind of talking about spontaneous fermentation. And then inside of the barrel, there's a development of like a protein-based membrane that develops inside that is called a pellicle. I'm sure you're familiar with.
Sure.
So he was just telling me that his friends in Italy that make natural wine, they through their process, a pellicle also grows within the barrels. And he said that the Italian natural winemakers in Italy, call their pellicles a veil. So that's where the name the veil came from. So it's deeply ingrained into the name of the veil, spontaneous fermentation. Again, go back to where I was when my first time and I was at Cantillon. I just wanted to brew spontaneous beer, right? So that's all I wanted to do. I didn't even really want to open a brewery. Like even up until like day one, like of all right, here we go. Here comes demo. I didn't really want to do it. You know what I mean? It was my best option, and I trusted the guys that I partnered up with, and I was just gonna go for it. I had no management experience other than like just basic stuff from working in my previous jobs. Never was a head brewer, any of that stuff. So I didn't know what I was doing at all, but I knew that I wanted to make spontaneous beer in Virginia. It was important to me. It was important to who I was, where I came from in terms of brewing. As a young brewer, I just dove right in without home brewing, learning about ingredients and styles, and started beer trading. Hated sour beer and wild beer in the beginning. Fell in love with it and just learned about it and pushed myself to get to the top of these producers, to learn from them and ask questions. It was who I am on the inside at that point, was to make spontaneous beer for myself. So it was important to me from the beginning, and my business partners knew it, and my business partners wanted to be involved with something that was different for Virginia.
Right,
they wanted to be involved with something that had never been done in Virginia, which is not fully true. There's a few breweries that were actually experimenting with spontaneous fermentation before we opened. So I'm not going to say we're the trailblazers here. But we definitely were one of the largest commercial cool ships in the state at the time when we opened, and we were doing as traditional as possible: turbid mash, aged hops, all that stuff.
And it didn't take Nostradamus to kind of foresee this future where local is such an important piece of craft beer, where that idea of local is something that connects consumers to makers of those things. And there's really nothing more that tells more of a local story than something like spontaneous beer that's brewed with, if it's possible, local or regional ingredients and fermented with the local terroir.
Totally.
That sells and connects that story, and then maybe in a broader sense creates a seriousness that allows you to play in some of the other elements of the business as well.
For sure. Also,
so let's talk.
One quick thing though, I want to also add there. From a selfish standpoint, another reason why I wanted to make spontaneous beer in Richmond, Virginia, is because I just wanted to drink it. At the time, it was not easy to get a bottle of Cantillon. It was not easy to get a bottle of Dre Fontaine. It was not easy to even get a bottle of Tilcan. Even if you did, it was expensive. It was $20, $30 for a bottle, even for just standard goose, non-fruited. So that was another selfish reason on why I wanted to make these beers, because it's one of my favorite styles to drink, and I wanted to be able to drink it and have access to it.
Fair enough.
So that was a real driving factor on why I wanted to make spontaneous beer.
So now with your spontaneous beer, and what we were just drinking was a 1, 2, and 3 year blended like a goose.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about that fermentation process then, as you take that inoculated spontaneous wort and rack it into barrels. Talk to me about the condition of the barrels, and then what that aging process and then looks like.
Yeah, for sure. So after the natural cooling and inoculation from the overnight in the cool ship, we kind of do we just kind of mix it all up and use a ladle actually, and are homogenized. We don't have what's a horny tank or anything like that.
Right.
So we just kind of just take a ladle and mix it all up and
in
kind
the
of
cool
try
ship
to,
itself.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I guess maybe that's technically a little bit of extra aeration, but we're definitely homogenizing the culture so that we get consistent fermentation throughout each barrel.
Yeah.
So at that point, we drain the barrels down into freshly dumped red wine French oak barrels, preferably from Virginia wineries, but not always from Virginia wineries. We've gotten a lot from Napa too.
And
But
only red wine then?
we only use red wine. Yep.
Okay.
We did one time. I filled 2 bourbon barrels because I think I ran out of wine barrels, and then I also was like, oh, let's just be weird and fill some bourbon barrels, and that was not a good idea. We dumped those. Those were just weird as crap.
Okay.
They were just not good.
Yeah.
But yeah. So French oak red wine barrels. They're either freshly dumped, or we will reuse spontaneous barrels that previously held spontaneous fermentation only. We will not use a barrel for spontaneous fermentation that had a beer that we had pitched culture into.
Okay.
So anything in those barrels that have spontaneous beer only have spontaneous microflora in those barrels. And then
Do you do a cleaning process either with the red wine barrels or with the previously used spontaneous barrels?
So either way, we just have a steam generator and we steam the barrels.
Yeah.
We'll rinse the outside with hot water and then we'll just steam the interior of the barrel. That's it. That's all we do. We don't treat it with any chemical or citric acid or anything like that. And then we'll just bring the barrels over from our wild facility to like our receiving bay where kind of the drain port is from the cool ship. And then we'll just fill the barrels by gravity, actually. And then we'll bring those barrels with the still wort over to the funky facility, which we call our funkhouse. And we allow to spontaneously ferment all on one level, pre-stacking. Once they're done blowing off, then we'll stack the barrels. And then they will sit in place until extraction. We do not move our barrels at all. We don't want to disturb the pellicle. So we will let the barrels sit from anywhere from 12 to 40 months and then blend accordingly.
Do you find any differences? What does that range taste like? If it's the same basic recipe and the same basic ingredients, do you find differences in brewing season to season? Do you find differences in where barrels are in your warehouse, where they're stacked, top to bottom, and a stack of barrels, and I'm looking at it about 5 high right here. Do you find any variation in that? Obviously whiskey and bourbon makers, love to play up the difference in this, same recipe, different rickhouse and different level of, heat, whatever, that seems to impact flavors. For you, what do you find to be the factors that affect the flavors of different barrels?
So first off, I'm terrible at note keeping. So in terms of like season and stuff like that, I'm not like, oh yeah, remember this one? This was like, it was 41 degrees overnight. Ooh yeah, this one's tasting a little weird. I'm not like
you're an artist, not a scientist.
Yeah, you know what I mean. I kind of just let it go.
Okay.
In terms of like. Are the top barrels, a little bit warmer, even though this is a climate controlled facility, where heat rises. So the top barrels are definitely exposed to a warmer temperature. Do I notice variation between the top and barrel, the top and bottom of that stack? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's super weird.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we'll be tasting through, let's try some one year stock. Start tasting through 1 year stock, and it is acidic as all get out. It is just like super acidic, and it's just like 3 barrels out of one stack, and then the other 7 barrels are just very balanced, almost no acid profile, super clean, Brett forward. And then we'll have some 3-year barrels that are the same way, super clean, balanced, almost no acid profile to them, and just Brett forward, but then we'll have 3 years that are like overly acidic and we're dumping it down the drain. You know what I mean? So it's I don't really know what the rhyme or reason is with that. We've seen so much variation within a single batch. We've seen variation between seasons. We've seen variation, and I don't know what the factor is, and I actually kind of don't even want to know, for me personally. So what I do is we extract, 20, 30, 40, 50 samples at a time, and we go through and we taste through all of those samples and we rate them 1 to 5. And then we kind of just go through back from there and then do the blend. So, okay, we're going to, this one's a 1. It's going to be good. You know what I mean? It's not a dumper, but, it's just kind of clean right now. It needs time. Let it be a 1, and it's going to maybe turn into a 5 next year, or a 4 or 3 next year. Or this one this is perfect right now. Extract it. it's not going to get any better than this. This is
Yeah.
a 5.
Yeah.
So let's take it now before it goes over the hill, right? So that's kind of just like where we are. So our beers are, especially with our wild mixed fermentation and spontaneous beers, they're based off palate. They're blended off palate. There's no science involved with them. There's not, this was,
Sure.
we racked this one in and it was a 41 degree night. This is going to be a doozy. I can't wait for this one in 18 months in 4 days. It's going to be incredible. It's not like that. It's just
Sure.
going through the stock and tasting what tastes right to make a beer that we envision to be the brand that we envision it to be. So it's important to us to let our palates kind of drive that ship.
Does that palate also drive decisions about beers that express themselves with fruit? Now, you're taking some of this stock and you're also making, different fruited expressions. You mentioned Fafoon is, from Cantillon as being one of those fundamental, beers that change your perception of sour beer. You make your own versions of these kinds of, fruited beers. How do you make that selection about barrel stock that goes into it and then start working with that fruit and those various fruits in order to create fruited expressions of these beers?
Yeah, so with our fruited wild beer, what we do is, we taste through, say we're tasting through this just wheat forward mixed fermentation beer that has a blend of Brett and Saccharomyces inoculated with our house culture, all in, Sauvignon Blanc barrels, right? So we taste through this whole stack of 10. Again, we don't really use puncheons or foeders, by the way, too. We primarily use just standard size wine barrels.
Mm-hmm.
I like the character of them. I like the variation. That's just me personally.
Sure.
So easier.
And I should clarify, those beers aren't necessarily all spontaneous, are they?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do a lot. We do a fair amount of mixed fermentation where we're actually pitching cultures too.
Sure.
So farmhouse inspired beer. That term is kind of all over the place and means so many things. You know what I mean? It's like lager. You know what I mean? Like or ale or something at this point.
Just
you know what I mean? Yeah.
Sure.
So we try not to say farmhouse.
Sounds authentic though. Farmhouse.
Yeah, right.
It sounds so real.
We're also in
so rustic.
Some of the most urban space ever. So there's no farmhouse anywhere around us. So we're not making farmhouse beers. We have a friendly little term that we call mixed fermies. So we actually got that trademarked. So so our mixed fermi beers. Are pitched beers. So we pitch culture into them, Saccharomyces, Brettanomyces, house culture, all that stuff. So when we do a stack of, just again, hypothetically, let's say it's heavily weeded. It has, Saison DuPont and, whatever this Brett strain is. And then we inoculate with our house culture. It's a blend of so many different things. Then it's all in Sauvignon Blanc barrels. We got 10 barrels. We'll taste through all the barrels. 3, 4, 5 of those are amazing. They're blowing our minds. Wow, so good. Can't believe it. I love this. Bottle it as is. So there's 2, 3, 4 that are solid but nothing special, right? So there's some nuance there. Nice oak character, balanced acidity, just kind of one-dimensional, right? This would make a great base for fruit beer. So that's kind of how we do our fruit beers. We allow that to be a complement to the fruit and vice versa. So the fruit complements the straightforward kind of one-dimensional based mixed fermentation beer, So that's kind of what we do with our fruit beers. So the barrels that we use and the stock that we use for the fruit beer may not be they may not be the finest expression of that brand, but they're not bad, They're just like not special on their own, you know what I mean? They need a little something extra. So there's usually, at least if we have 10 barrels, I guarantee you, almost every time, 1 to 2 barrels we're dumping because there's something wrong with it, or it's just too acidic. Like we with our beers, personally, I believe our beers are balanced in terms of acidity. So when we try to keep them that way, for drinkability. So if a beer is too acidic, it's getting dumped to me. I'm not the one to, let's blend it out. You know what I mean? That's not me. If it doesn't taste like something I'm going to drink on its own, then it's not making the cut.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's kind of the mindset behind fruited versus unfruited for any wild barrel fermented beer that we do.
What does that fruiting process look like for you? How do you go about it? Are you adding in wood? Do you rack out into external tanks? Do you punch down? I mean, obviously this will change, depending on which fruit you're using. How do you make some of those fruit selection choices? In particular, I'm thinking about a beer that we just reviewed in our Funk and Fruit issue for Craft Beer and Brewing, Vast One. And I've just found that richness and deepness and like nuttiness of the cherry character to be something that I don't taste often in American fruited wild beers. So I'm curious in thinking about that from your perspective, what that process looks like.
So we never have fruited inside of oak yet. I'd like to, but we've never done it yet. So currently what we do is we will take IQF, frozen whole fruit. I think there's only been one beer that we've ever put puree in for a mixed fermentation beer. Everything is whole fruit.
Okay.
We always do that.
But frozen fruit, IQF.
Frozen, yes. We've done some fresh, not really. There's no reason why we're not doing fresh versus IQF, but it's primarily for availability purposes. You know what I mean? Like sometimes we'll just be randomly on a Thursday, just tasting through barrels and be like, this is fire. Like we need a bottle of this as is.
Yeah.
But these three, let's put it on blackberries and blueberries.
Right.
It's not blackberry or blueberry season, so I'm going to get frozen blackberries and blueberries, but it's whole fruit, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we will throw that in there. But anyway, so 9 times out of 10, we just extract onto the fruit that's in a tote. So we call them totes. They're just an external stainless tank that has a false bottom in it. So we'll throw the fruit in, purge the tank, sanitize the tank, of course. Throw the fruit onto the false bottom, purge the tank with CO2, and then just rack on top of the fruit.
Sure.
And then we've experimented with all types of lengths of fermentation. We've tried 5 days, and then the bottles explode. We've tried 4 months, and then we're like, oh crap, that was oxidized. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we've tried all different lengths of fermentation. For us, re-fermentation on the fruit.
Yeah.
For us, the sweet spot's probably 6 weeks,
okay.
6 to 8 weeks max. But yeah, so and in terms of what fruit we want to use, so we do actually work with a local fruit supplier called Agriberry, and we try to use as much local fruit, whole fruit as possible, and they freeze it and store it for us too. So now what we're actually trying to do is we dedicate our local fruit to spontaneous beers. So any of the non-spontaneous beers are typically utilizing just IQF that we're purchasing from a local supplier, but they're not local fruit. We're getting blueberries from North Carolina, huckleberries from Pacific Northwest, blackberries from I don't even know where. So you know what I mean?
Sure.
Cherries from Greece. We're just getting from everywhere. So, but anyway, so the local stuff is primarily for spontaneous, and then the other stuff is just for whatever. But yeah, so we've done a few punch downs. I don't know if that really is beneficial. We've gotten good results from punch downs. We've gotten good results without punch downs. It's always scary when you're introducing oxygen, opening the tank, and all that kind of stuff, especially with these delicate mixed fermentation beers.
Sure.
So we try not to do punch downs, but every once in a while we'll do it. Get a little bit more extraction out of it, or yeah. So and then just deciding what we have, deciding which fruit goes into which beer. A lot of times it's the decision is made based on if it's a spontaneous beer, it's what's available left with our local fruit supplier. If it's not spontaneous, it's kind of like what have we not done before? So it's trying to just try different fruit combinations. Oh, we haven't done strawberries and blueberries yet. Let's give it a whirl. Let's see how it goes for us. But sometimes it's like, oh man, this beer would be incredible if it was just bombed out with blueberries. You know what I mean? So this is a straight up blueberry beer. I know it. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
already know it in your heart that this is a blueberry beer. But that's actually not as common as like, which combination haven't we done yet, guys? You know what I mean?
Let's roll our magic dice and see
Yeah.
which combination. Yeah.
More learning,
Sure,
more experimentation. What fruits taste well together, you know, and complement each other and go well with this type of beer. This mixed fermentation, you know, oak forward, slightly acidic, funky beer. What fruit blend is the best fruit blend for our personal palates? You know?
Have you had some that didn't work out where you've had to kind of pivot on that and either blend something in again or make a move on it?
Not necessarily, honestly.
Cool.
It's always turned out to be acceptable in our eyes. You know, maybe it's not to our personal preference. Like maybe we're like, oh man, that one is a sour lad. You know what I mean? That one came out a little sour. But somebody's gonna like it. You know what I mean? Somebody out there likes sour beer, you know, and we'll be like, all right, let's give it a shot and let it out into the wild. No pun intended. Am I right? And then. So give them the super acidic beer, and then we look online, and it's receiving incredible reviews, and we're like, yeah, see, somebody really liked acidic beer, you know. So
if you describe it correctly, so that people can make the choices that fit their taste, then
yeah, for sure. And you know, we also have to remember too that you know, so we are not our customers. We're getting our beer at employee discount. You know what I mean? So we are not the ones that are paying our bills. We are not the ones that are keeping the lights on.
Right.
You know, we do have to keep our fan base and customers in mind and what they seem to purchase the most and what they really enjoy and what kind of reviews they're giving, what beers. So we also do keep that in mind too. You know, so we have to remember that we're not just making beer for ourselves, that we're making beer for everyone to enjoy. But at the end of the day, we have to still be proud of what we release and something that we would consider as acceptable and drinkable to someone. You know what I mean?
There's that artistic vision, and that artistic vision is also balanced by the feedback from those customers.
For sure.
And that feedback, you know, I imagine you use it to guide future decisions and, you know, help inform the way you make decisions in the future. You know, but it's always in that balance of, does this fit with the vision that we want to do as well?
For sure.
Yeah. Let's get existential for a moment.
Okay.
You know, one of the questions I ask commonly on the podcast is, what does success look like for you and for the Veil? Ooh. How will you know when you've achieved success? You know, have you achieved it? Is it something in the future? What does that look like for you?
Wow. You're just going to hit me with that.
It's a good place to finish.
On a Tuesday evening.
I mean, it's getting late here. We've been drinking a bunch of beers. You know, if you can't wax philosophical about it at this point, then, you know, I'm pretty sure you can.
Yeah. So
I think it's an important question to ask.
It is an important question.
Because I think, you know, there are people and there are breweries in the industry that are constantly chasing some idea of success but haven't defined it.
Right.
And they keep chasing and chasing and chasing. And I'm not sure that, you know, they never become comfortable with some idea of what the business should be, what their customers are, you know, or what their goals are for running a business. And so, you know, I think it's an interesting question to ask people, what does that look like? There are some folks, you know, for whom commercial success and money and fame and everything else, you know, that's their definition of success. There are other folks where that creative expression and achieving something is that definition of success. There are folks that have already grown to a comfortable level where they can define success for themselves. And so I think it's a curious thing, you know, but it's something that everyone has to engage in to consider, what are our goals here and when will we know that we've achieved them?
I agree. It's definitely a difficult question for me to answer, honestly. Some days I think I'm the most successful guy in the world, and not from a financial standpoint. I'm successful because I get to go to work and do what I love, and I don't have any boss breathing down my neck. And if I, you know,
you finally got someone that can pay you to make spontaneous beer too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so I can do whatever I want, and if one day I want to show up at 2 p.m. and leave at 5, I can do that. You know what I mean? As a business owner,
sure.
you know what I mean? So that's successful, right? In some aspects. Sometimes I look at our payroll and I'm like, okay, we employ over 60 people. That's pretty cool and successful, I guess. Right? I mean, to be able to create 60 different jobs is pretty incredible, So that's to measure success is so hard to define, right? So it can be so many different things. To me, I don't consider like being a billionaire successful, I mean, I guess in some aspects it is, but that's not like I'm not going to be successful until I'm a billionaire. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's so many different things that we can do, and feelings that we can feel to be, that we can consider that we're successful, right? In my opinion. So being able to just be hanging out and, in a setting with some of the production team, and I overhear someone tell another person at this event or social situation that we're in, it's incredible working at the Veil. I love working at the Veil. It's so much fun, and they really take care of us. When I hear somebody say something like that, then I'm like, man, we've achieved success. We have now, that brings it even further to that, like, okay, yeah, we have 60 plus employees and they seem like they're happy. I hope they're happy. I put my heart and soul into making sure that our team is happy, because I've been in situations where I have not been happy. I think every person in this world has worked a job that they weren't happy at, that they weren't appreciated, that their efforts weren't recognized, that they weren't considered when they had something to say. So I put a lot of effort into trying to change that mindset, and also to like create a space for our team that they're comfortable in, and that they feel that they're taken care of and that they're considered. Every day that I walk out of the brewery, every person I walk by, I tell them thank you, and I say I appreciate you. And I don't say it because it's part of my script. I say it's because I mean it. I appreciate every single one of them, because I wouldn't be who I am, and the Veil wouldn't be who they are without them. Every person plays a very integral part in the success of the Veil. So success is just hard to measure, right? So it's like, we're paying our bills, our lights are still on, we're making payroll every month. That's successful too. You know what I mean? So
you're growing, you're adding locations, you're able to kind of expand that
and create more jobs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's success too, right? So
make more people happy with the beer that you make.
Right. So, I mean, there's so many different things that could be defined as successful in terms of the Veil. For me, success is, in terms of starting a business and owning a business, success for me is longevity. So how can we make this brand and this brewery stand the test of time? Well, we will never know, because we don't know what the economy is going to be like 10 years from now. We don't know if people are just going to stop drinking beer 10 years from now and just go all hard seltzer on us. You know what I mean? You never know.
You never know.
You never know.
Sure.
So it's hard to say where we're all going to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. But for me, our goal right now is to set ourselves up the best that we can in terms of longevity. So if we can stand the test of time, if we can all kind of ride the wave until it's time to move on from this world, then to me that is success. So I don't know if I'm successful until I'm gone from here and we're still open or not. But there's little things that happen throughout the day that make me happy and that make me feel like I'm doing the right thing, and that the Veil is on the right path, and that we're creating a space for people that they're happy to come and work at on a day-to-day basis, and that customers are coming in, and I walk through the tap room as I leave to go home, and I just see 100 people with smiles on their face, and talking about, oh my gosh, this Vertigosa is insane, you know what I mean? Or, dude, so juicy, you know what I mean? So, I mean, that's success too.
Sure, for sure.
I don't know. So again, the definition of success in this industry and who we are is all over the place. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So,
well, I hope we can have another conversation about this in 20 years
I
and
hope so
reflect
too.
back on this once again.
I hope so too.
If people want to learn more about the Veil, where do they learn more about you all?
The most active place that that we are a part of for the Veil is just Instagram. So we're always constantly on Instagram.
Sure.
The Veil Brewing. It's at the Veil Brewing. So we post every single day on there. We have a lady named Amber who runs our social media and does our photography and videography and does an amazing job. And then our director of production, brewing lead, Justin Anderson, who's our first ever production hire, also known as Catboy. So us three together, myself and those two, we're kind of like our social media team. So we put a lot of effort into trying to make it fun but informative. We post every single day, and we're super responsive with comments and messages and stuff like that. We still have Facebook, and
sure.
We have email. Same thing with Facebook. It's at the Veil Brewing, and we have a website that we update daily too with current draft list and to-go availability, which is just theveilbrewing.com. So, but Instagram's probably the best way to get a hold of us and to see what's new with the Veil and what's going on in our world.
G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability. Kickstart your innovation with Old Orchard craft juice concentrates. SS BrewTech has a clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the highest standards of the industry, and Fermentus is the obvious choice for beverage fermentation. If you have a chance to get to Richmond, Virginia, and pop into the Veil Tap Room, it's an experience that you won't soon forget. It's a striking, visual, stimulating, wild, different, unique. There is not another tap room I have been to in my career here, visiting breweries, talking to brewers, that is quite like it. It's something that should be on every serious beer fan's list of places to visit. Matt Tarpey, The Veil Brewing, thanks for joining me here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.